How is it that politicians always seem to have a leg up on us? How do they manipulate us? How do they turn us one against another? Find the answers to that and more on today's podcast. Hello, folks, and welcome back to the podcast. This episode is called Divided and Conquered. In prior episodes, we talked about how we began to be divided by the idea that there is no truth, that each one of us has his own truth, and that's all we need. And of course, what this did is it disconnected us from each other. Because when you look at your own world or your own truth, it's very different from the next person's. Yet when we all look at the real world that we all share, it's the same world. So that unifies us a lot more than our internal world. But if we're told to ignore that and we actually listen to them, like we did, then what happens is we were all cut adrift and we started to drift apart from each other and to sort of hide out each in our own little world. The internet then came along, made this even worse, because now you have little internet echo chambers where you can live and not even have to bother with people from the other side. So aside from this is how our division started. Now, aside from this, there's something else that's interesting. There is a natural difference that exists between us. And we're going to explain what that is in a moment. And the leaders, politicians, whatever you want to call them, they know about these differences. And they use them. They actually went in and they exploited that to actively push us apart. So first they cut our bonds with the truth. We started drifting. Then they actually came in and pushed us apart. And now we see ourselves in the current situation. Like many of us know, we're probably not too far from a civil war. So let's talk about this division, this naturally occurring division, and how it works. So I'll start with a question. Are you right wing or left wing? Right? Simple question. Most people can answer it easily. Here's a harder one. Why are you right wing or left wing? That one's a lot harder to answer because, in my opinion, and this is certainly true in my personal case, in my opinion, we make these decisions. They're not even really decisions. They sort of happen spontaneously when we're very young. What happens is we listen to people debating an issue, and naturally one side of the argument appeals to us and makes sense, and the other side is shocking and makes no sense. And so naturally we gravitate towards that side without even thinking too much about it, and that's it. Now we belong to the right or the left, depending on your personality. So I'm willing to bet that for most people it's like this. And then of course we spend the rest of our lives justifying why it makes so much sense for us to believe in this side and not the other side. But in reality, we didn't do that when we initially made the choice, right? It was almost like it was made for us. Our minds were already leaning in that direction and we just went with it. So this is an interesting division and it already exists. Now, the interesting part about this is that why are there always two sides in politics? Excuse me. For example, there's always a right and a left. Why two sides? Why isn't there 5 sides or 10 sides or 50? Right? In the US, we have Republicans and Democrats. Now, you might think, well, there's a lot more political parties. What are you talking about? There's more than 2 sides. There are more than 2 political parties, but they tend to congregate around the ideas of right and left. Even in countries like England or even Israel has like 20-something political parties. It's crazy. Even in countries like that, you always end up with a right-wing bloc and a left-wing bloc. And you have some stragglers. They call themselves centrists or maybe on the extreme left or right. But it's always on that continuum. It's like a line and there's 2 sides. So why is it a line with 2 sides? Why isn't it a square with 4 sides, right? Or a hexagon with 6? It's always 2. And so that's the first thing that's interesting. So how do we explain the fact that there's 2 and why is there always 2? The best, easiest explanation I have found on this comes from ancient Chinese philosophy. It's the philosophy that which they call the yin, the yang, and the Tao. Very ancient Chinese. This is thousands of years old. And so, as the theory goes, the universe and everything that is in it was created by using two separate forces. And it was the interplay of these two forces. It was sort of like a wrestling match between the two. This is what creates life. This is what creates a universe. You may have seen the symbol of the yin, yang, and Tao. It looks like a circle. And like for some reason now, a lot of surfing t-shirts have it. It's a circle, and it's divided into two parts. And there's like a squiggly line that divides it. And one side is white, the other's black. They're supposed to look like, they're meant to be opposites. And there's like a swirling effect, as if they're spinning around each other. And so the idea here is that there's two forces, and they're sort of wrestling and, swirling into each other. And this is how the universe is created, according to them. So what are these two forces like? What are the characteristics of them? So the yang is known as the direct force. It's point A to point B. It's like an arrow. It's when you deal with a problem directly. Right? And the yin is the opposite. The yin is known as circular or indirect force. Now you'll notice that in just about any situation in life that you're faced with, you always have this choice of you can use a direct solution or an indirect. Right? Direct means you just run the problem over. Very simple. Just brute force, just barrel over the problem. And the other side, the yin, is where you use more intelligence, deception, cleverness or cunning, and you try to go around the problem. You try to deceive. If it's a person that's part of the problem, you try to deceive them. So, for a real clear, simple example, let's say you're on the street and somebody comes up to you and pulls out a knife and says, "Give me your money, or I'm going to kill you." So how can you solve this? Well, the direct way, the yang way of solving it would be you pull out a gun and shoot him. You pull out a bat and you break it over his head. You somehow just pummel him into submission, and that's it. And that's one way to solve it. The other way, the yin way of doing it, would be you start sweet-talking him and you say, "Listen, I have a family. Please don't kill me. I don't have much money. This is all I got. Here, you can have it." There's a million ways, million variations of these, but it's either direct or indirect. And just about any situation in life has this choice. And so this lends believability or credence to the fact that maybe the Chinese are right. Maybe there are two forces, and the interplay of the two forces is what creates life. We'll also see, of course, that it takes a man and a woman to create life. And so, again, there's always this duality, these two forces. But a really interesting point here to remember is that both forces are necessary for life to exist. Okay? Very important point. We'll come back to that in a moment. Now, there are other words you can use to describe these two forces, and they're important, so we'll go over them now. So we talked about direct versus indirect. But when you're direct, you also speak very clearly. You speak very simply. You want to make things well understood. And it's a very simple, non-deceiving, brute strength is involved. So it's strong, it's direct, it's honest, it's simple. These are all associated with yang. The other side, yin, is associated with being clever, being cunning, intelligence, deception, being indirect, playing, what do they call now, 5D chess or 3D chess. It's that type of force. And of course you can combine the two. And all of us, by the way, since we belong to this universe, we personally were also created by the interplay of these two forces. So, now one of the two tends to be dominant. And this is how we tend to lean in one direction or the other. So, for example, if you are a yang-dominated person, then you will be drawn to leaders who are yang-type leaders. Leaders that are strong, that speak clearly and directly, and they don't care what anybody thinks. And I'm going to do it this way because this is the right thing to do, and that's that. You're going to be drawn to that. If you're a yin-dominated person, you're going to look for leaders that are nice, that have a good image, that smile a lot, that, kiss babies during their political tours, and that, say the right words. They know how to navigate that subtler aspect, which is the domain of the yin force. So this is how we lean to one side or the other. So how do we get around something like this? What we have to do is we have to first of all recognize what our bias is. And that's step number one. Once you recognize it, you're never the same, right? You can sort of observe yourself, but the most important part is that you can also observe how people are trying to manipulate you. And we'll talk in a moment about how people try to manipulate these two sides. The political establishment recognizes these two sides. They know them very well. And they know how to portray images that appeal to both sides. Okay? And in doing this, they make us emotionally comfortable. Right? And when you're emotionally comfortable with somebody, all of a sudden their policies, it's not that big a deal. You might say that it is, you might even think that it is. But the reality is, when you're comfortable with a leader, it takes the emotional edge off the relationship. And so now, if the leader makes a mistake, you'll be apt to forgive him. If the leader on the other side, which you don't like, tends to make the same mistake, you're going to want to hang him from a flagpole. And we see this all the time, right? We see that, when a Republican lies, the Democrats go crazy. When a Democrat lies, the Republicans go crazy. But neither one of them goes crazy when their own party lies, right? And so this is how it works. Because when you see, let's say you're a direct yang type of person, you see a leader who talks like you, who thinks like you can understand what he's doing. You may even be able to predict his next moves. This makes you very comfortable. On the other hand, if you have a leader on the other side, let's say you're a yang person and you have a yin leader in front of you, you don't understand what he's doing. You don't like what he's doing. He doesn't, represent the same things that you like to see. You don't really understand him. You can't predict his movements. And so all of this serves to make you very uncomfortable. And so this leader's already on your nerves just by being who he is. If on top of that he makes a mistake or he lies or he does something wrong, that's it. You've had enough of this guy, right? But on the other hand, when your favorite leader does the same thing, he's still okay, right? So this is how it works. Very subtle and very effective. And this is why they use it to divide us. So now we need to remember, once again, that both of these sides are valid. Both of them. You need to burn that into your brain, because this is what's happened to our country. In the last, maybe 10 years or so, people have gotten to the point where they say, you know what, those people on the other side, they're bad people. They're horrible people. They're horrible human beings. We need to get rid of them. We need to destroy them. And that is the final step before actually doing it, before a civil war. So I'll remind you, when you had regimes who did something like this, okay, Hitler is a famous example, right? He did a purge of all the communists in Germany. The famous fire of the Reichstag, of the German parliament. He blamed it on the leftists and then he purged them out. What happened next is the country went to the extreme right and there was a disaster. Okay, the same thing happened in the Soviet Union. You had Stalin who purged everybody else who didn't think like him. So when you have regimes like this, what happens is they get rid of that balance that you need, that nature provides. There's a balance between two sides because we need the two sides to keep each other in check. Neither of the two sides is perfect. So one side has to stop the other when the other side has gone too far. And this is the part that we're having a problem with nowadays, because we retreated into our own little worlds and we think that that's all there is. We get shocked by the other world when we see it, and now we think naturally, oh, that other side has to die. And we have no idea what we're dealing with or what we're talking about. So, having said all this and introduced this concept, let's have a little fun with it. Now, I'm going to go through all the presidents that have been in the U.S. since the time that I got here, and we're going to classify each one of them, and we're going to see this principle in action. So, I got here in 1976, so Jimmy Carter was the first president that I dealt with. He had just been elected. And Jimmy Carter, if you try to classify him, yang versus yin, he was definitely on the yin side. He was on the indirect side. This guy was a very, very nice guy. He really was. He was a very nice person. He was very generous. He was very charitable. Did a lot of good things for a lot of people. But this was his personality. When he had to be tough, he had all kinds of trouble. Famously, if you lived through that era or if you read about it, everyone walked all over Jimmy Carter. The Soviets walked all over him. They invaded multiple countries during his presidency. Iran fell. Iran took 60 American hostages. And even when Carter tried to mount a hostage rescue attempt, it was a disaster. Because, of course, he had de-emphasized the military. There was all kinds of bureaucracy. Because, again, when you have an indirect person leading the military, what do they worry about? Well, we don't want war to be too dirty. We don't want there to be a bad image. We need to have political officers second-guessing every command decision. And this is what happened. And so it was very hard for the military to operate. And the hostage rescue attempt turned into a disaster. If you've never heard about it, read about it. It's called Desert One. It was one of the most embarrassing moments in American military history. So Jimmy Carter, again, he was on the yin, on the indirect side. Needless to say, I hated Jimmy Carter, right? Because my bias happens to be on the right. So I didn't like him. He annoyed me. I didn't like what he did. I thought it was a disaster. 1980 rolls around. Ronald Reagan gets elected. Now, what's he like? Well, Ronald Reagan was a yang leader, right? He talked about peace through strength, for example. So what does that mean? It means I'm not going to go around begging for peace. I'm not going to sue for peace. I'm not going to pay people money to not attack me. No, I'm going to be strong. And you're going to want peace with me, or I'm going to kick your ass. That was Ronald Reagan, right? And so there was a huge confrontation he had, for example, with the Soviets. The Soviets eventually backed down, and eventually they fell largely because of the way Reagan treated them. So Reagan, we see, went over to the yang side. He was very popular, right? He lasted 8 years instead of 4. Of course, I loved Ronald Reagan. No more need be said, right? So 1988 rolls around. Reagan is succeeded by George Bush, the father, not to be confused with George W. Bush. His son was elected 10, 12 years later. So George H.W. Bush was technically a Republican, but what was he like personality-wise? He was kind of in the middle, right? He wasn't the rough, tough, manly, plain-speaking guy. He sort of, he was gave you the runaround all the time. He did start a war with Iraq, but if you see the way he did it, he was just, he had to build a coalition of 40 nations. He had to announce it for like 8 months straight. He had to threaten Saddam Hussein every day of the last 6 months with the same threat over and over before he even went and attacked. And we need to remember that George H.W. Bush had also been in the CIA. He'd actually been the CIA director. So what is espionage? Espionage is a great use of the yin force, indirect, right? Deception, darkness, right? Sort of, walking in the shadows, striking your enemy with surprise. He doesn't know you're there. He doesn't know who's a spy and who isn't. This had been George Bush's world. And so he was much, much more indirect than Reagan. Famously, he's the one who said, "Read my lips, no new taxes." And then he went and raised taxes. Right? So needless to say, I didn't like George Bush nearly as much as I liked Reagan. He was sort of blah, he was okay. I didn't exactly hate him, but I really didn't like him either. So he was sort of in the middle, somewhat. Now, after him came Bill Clinton. Now, who was Bill Clinton? What was he like? Bill Clinton, to me, was, Mr. Detached Apathy. He was a happy-go-lucky guy. He was always smiling, great personality, joking around, guy you'd love to have a beer with, right? Fun guy. The ladies loved him, a little too much as it turned out. And so now we're heading back over to the indirect side, personality-wise. By the way, notice that we're talking just about personalities. We're not talking about policies here. Okay? We'll get to that later. So Bill Clinton, again, moving over to the indirect side. And of course, he didn't really care about policies all that much. He was kind of objective. He could go either way. So, there was a sort of centrist policy while Clinton was there. People still talk about the centrist Clinton Democrats, but personality-wise, he was definitely on the indirect side, had all kinds of problems, all kinds of scandals. Of course, he famously cheated on his wife with the intern in the White House, and he lied about it under oath. He got caught, and he still got away with it, right? So when I look at Bill Clinton, I can't stand this guy, right? Because again, my bias is on the right, and so I'm looking for leaders that are strong, principled, they don't move, they take a stance and they don't move. Clinton was very wishy-washy, right? And he was very shifty. He cheated on his own wife, and then he lied about it, but yet he knew how to get away with these things. Now, lots of people loved Bill Clinton. He got reelected. He lasted 8 years. So this is one of the things that really made me think about this whole yin-yang issue, because I could not understand, why do so many people like him? It actually bothered me. This is what made me think about it. So the reality is that yin people, he had all these sort of qualities that yin people admire. Hey, he's smart, he got away with it, he didn't make all these drastic decisions, no one died when Clinton lied, is what they said famously. And so again, he was very loved, and he actually, he went through his 2 full terms. And then after him came George W. Bush, who was the son of the first Bush. Now, George W. Bush his personality was more on the yang side than his father. And also, of course, than Bill Clinton. He was a Texan, he was a cowboy, and he had the mannerisms and the swagger and all that. And so right away, emotionally, I was much more comfortable with W. Bush. However, by this time, I had been observing this for a while, and I started to realize that I was getting played. That all these different images they're putting in front of you, they're different images, but the country was still going in the same direction, no matter who was up there. So even though I felt emotionally comfortable with George W. Bush, I started to look at his policies more objectively, and I didn't like most of them. So, but nonetheless, we're moving now again to the yang side. So he does his 8 years, and now it's Barack Obama. Barack Obama, more on the yin side. Now, Obama is interesting because Obama actually looks, if you look at him, he has a way of making it look like he's speaking directly and plainly to you, but he's not. He's actually very deceptive. Obama is a mystery, right? Many people, there was even an issue with his birth certificate. Nobody was even sure if he was born in the U.S., right? So there's a lot of mystery with him. There was a lot of deception. There was a lot of foreign influence. And he is the one who really made a lot of cultural changes. The U.S. after Obama was not the same as the U.S. when he got elected. And so, But nonetheless, he was very much on the yin side. You didn't see him with a lot of swagger or bravado or getting angry. He was always very like calm and collected, and he sort of did his thing in the background, which really bothered the heck out of me. So he does his 8 years, and again, a lot of people loved him. And after him comes Trump. Trump is, of course, way over on the yang side, right? Talks tough, he's the best. You know, no one has ever seen blah, 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 you know, whatever it is. It's always the same thing. It's like a broken record, right? So Trump is personality very much on the yang side. Okay, so now let's think about for a moment what's happened here. During all these years, you had Jimmy Carter on the yin side, Reagan on yang, right? Now Bush starts to move over kind of in the middle. Clinton goes back to yin. George W. Bush back to yang. Obama back to yin. Trump back to yang. What's going on here? Okay, interesting, right? So what's happening here is that whoever's in charge of all this, you know, three-ring circus that we call the US, they're showing you one side of the coin until you're sick of looking at that one side, and then they bring out another side and they show that to you. But the most important thing to note in all this is that from the time that George H.W. Bush got elected, the first Bush, from that time to the time that Trump got elected, span of 28 years, 7 presidencies, all this yin-yang flip-flopping, right? The policies were the same. Okay? Globalism, exporting industries from the US, exporting jobs, right? Building up the whole world, turning us into a financial hub, all kinds of financial trickery, nation of gamblers, right? Debt astronomically exploding, taxes rising, inflation rising, country being impoverished. All of that just continued on and on and on and on through those 28 years. Very interesting, right? Unbelievable, you might say. But this is how they do it. So they had all of us entertained with all these little emotional games. They put a little mannequin in front of us that we like. Oh, you don't like this guy anymore? Okay, here's the other mannequin. You like him? Okay, wonderful. We'll keep him up there for a while. Oh, you don't like him anymore? Okay, we'll put this one in front of you for a while. Okay? And all the while, education doing this. Right? And they keep dividing us. They keep exploiting us, which we've talked about in the prior episodes, making us more emotional, making us less logical, making us less able to think for ourselves. And now we're at the point where we almost want to kill each other. So, having said all this, how to reverse this? Well, as I said before, the first thing you need to do is recognize your bias. Whether it's right or it's left, it doesn't matter. And you know what? We need both the right and the left. But we need them both to be sane. We need normal people, people who actually live in the real world. And they have different perspectives. You need the different perspectives, right? But you need them under an umbrella of sanity. So even though I'm right-wing, and yes, when I hear left-wing people speaking, it bothers me. Okay, but I realize that we need that other perspective. You need to hear it. Because I'm not perfect. I'm going to screw up all kinds of things, right? And so I may like a decision that I just made, but it may have been the wrong decision. And only someone from the other side is going to say that to your face. And that's what we need. And that's what we're missing. So, just to wrap up, again, we started being divided when they introduced that ridiculous idea of, follow your own truth, there is no big truth. That's when we started drifting apart. But then they came in and they pushed us apart by recognizing that humans we sort of come in 2 flavors, right? Direct versus indirect, right? And like I said, we're all a blend, right? Sometimes You might be a direct person, but sometimes you'll opt for an indirect path, and vice versa, because we're a blend. But there's one side that dominates. And so they recognize this, they meaning the leaders, whoever's in charge of this, they recognize this difference, and they start playing to the emotions of each side. And they start sort of swapping the two out when popular opinion goes either one way or the other. And then they de-emphasized education during all these years, made us emotional, illogical, and now we're at this point where where we're about to start killing each other. So, know your bias, and then start detecting, start observing all the things that they present to you, the things that they show to you. Watch your own reactions. When you like something without thinking about it, be careful, because that's a trap. It may still be a good idea, but you need to think about it and make sure that it is. If you don't think about it, you're going to fall into all kinds of traps. And that goes for both sides. Okay, so once again, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.